Welcome to part 2 of the series on the Fazortan phase shifter by the d16 audio group. In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at how to control knobs on the Fazortan from the LFO Tool by Xfer Records. It has some great signal processing in it, but today we're just going to use it as a control device, and we're going to see a couple of different ways that it can generate MIDI controller messages. To take advantage of MIDI control over the LFO Tool, we're going to create a software instrument and load the LFO Tool as an audio unit's MIDI controlled effect. The LFO Tool will be able to transmit continuous controller messages. So here is where we set the continuous controller number that we'd like to transmit. The LFO Tool only transmits one stream of MIDI controller messages, and those are the ones that are set up to control the cutoff point here. In the LFO Tool, you can create your own waveforms very easily, or you can load them from a menu. You can have on board up to 12 different waveforms at a time. Here is where you set which waveform controls the target, and therefore providing the messages that would be sent out as continuous controller number 1. The peak-to-peak range of those messages will be controlled by the position of this fader. You can also offset those messages with this fader here, which is automatable, or if you wanted to get creative, you could control it from another LFO tool. Those messages are transmitted by the LFO tool down the inter-application communication bus, so make sure you've activated that on your audio MIDI setup panel. On the Click and Ports page of Logic's environment, you'll be able to see those messages showing up on your input monitor. You can get some nice modulation settings on the Fazortan itself without having to resort to adding an LFO tool, but the LFO tool can also do interesting things like become a step sequencer, so I think that's a worthy way to demonstrate the use of these two devices. I've loaded an FM8 on a software instrument track, and as an insert I loaded a Fazortan. In the environment window, make sure you're looking at your mixer panel. I've moved things around a bit so we can see the LFO tool and the object device. Now let's get a transformer. We'll be able to pick up the LFO tool messages from here, and we'll be able to send them onto this channel strip, which includes the Fazortan. Open up the transformer. If you saw the last tutorial, what we're going to do is change controller messages into fader messages. Everything that equals a controller becomes a fader. Those fader messages will talk to the knobs on the Fazortan. All we have to do is ascertain the ID number of the knob. So to do that, again, we get a monitor, and we hook it up to the output of the channel strip with the Fazortan on it, wiggle the knob of interest, and observe the value. Fader, channel 3, parameter number 5. It's channel 3 because the volume and pan pots are channel 1, the instrument itself is channel 2, and the first plug-in becomes channel 3, and channel 4, etc. for more plug-ins that we add. Now that we know the ID of the knob, we open up the transformer, and we set the channel to become fixed at 3, and we set the parameter number to 5. I've set the LFO tool to oscillate once through the pattern per bar. I've assigned this particular wave to the cutoff point number here. Watch how the knob responds. I'm going to make adjustments of the cutoff offset and the cutoff range, and we can see how it affects the knob. Now let's hit play on Logic. Now those are live messages coming up the inter-application communication bus, so you have to make sure that you've got your target track selected on your arrange page. That way those live MIDI messages flow through this device. If you have any other track selected, those IAC messages are not going to come out that cable on the environment window. It's also not a bad idea to actually record those continuous controller messages on the track. I'm going to record a little bit of it using the offset control and the range amount. With the piano roll open with the hyperdraw window open showing continuous controller 1, you can see the movements that were made by the LFO tool. Now you can keep that track and change the transformer to generate messages for a different knob on the Fazortan and start to compile messages from multiple knobs on one track. And there's one other nifty thing I want to show you in this domain of MIDI control. You can drag and drop the waveform data right from the LFO tool onto your arrange page, but you have to have your sequencer running. Make sure you have that going. So I'll have play going here. And there you see your content. With that drag and drop method, the values are no longer scaled by the range control here, but they are still offset by the value on this side. You could then go and change the transformer to make different types of messages and carry on adding more control over other knobs on your targets. That's it for this demonstration on the LFO tool and the Fazortan. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial.